Hello everyone and welcome to Fallen Angel Customs. Today we'll be taking this Ghoulia Yelps doll, who I recently got replacement arms for, and giving her a brand new look. As some of you know, I've been working on a series of dolls which shows different Lolita styles, and this little lady is excited to join them. And now your wait is over for the poll I put up a few months ago on Instagram, asking if you preferred pink or blue. Ready to find out why? Let's get started. I started out with two pattern pieces, one to gauge the width of the ruffles and the other for the base of the skirt. I cut the skirt base out with white cotton and the ruffles with white organza, and then began my slow descent back into madness. I have a hatred for gathers. When I first learned how to make them, I was working on a cosplay outfit, of which the entire skirt is made of gathers, all 120 meters of them, and I gathered them all by hand. The skirt took me 6 months in total to complete, and once it was finished, I swore never again would I do gathers. I was wrong. Oh, so very wrong. Every piece of clothing, be it cosplay or doll related, has contained gathers somewhere. They won't let me escape them. Not ever, no matter how hard I try. As I completed each set of gathers, I sewed them down onto the skirt base, using a piece of white lace to break up each layer, as well as cover the rough edge of the top of the gathered ruffles. With the underskirt complete for the time being, it is time to begin the bodice and overskirt. I started out by cutting all the pieces with blue cotton, except for the centre bodice piece, which I used white to tie in with the white of the underskirt. To start out, I attached the bodice pieces together so that they made one solid piece, before sewing the sleeves in place, hemming the cuffs and attaching the ruffles, before sewing the side seams of the bodice, since it's so much easier to do with the sleeves in place already. Taking the same lace I used on the cuffs of the sleeves, I carefully sew it along the collar of the bodice and use it to accent the centre panel. This is where I decided I wanted it to go along the whole outer edge, which included the upper skirt, and since I wanted to make it look seamless, it was time to switch to the upper skirt, sewing it to the bodice with an opening at the centre before returning to lace, sewing it down as I hemmed along the edge. With the upper layer complete, I sewed the underskirt in place, and that's where I hit a problem. The underskirt was much too big to fit underneath, and there was no way I was returning to gather hell. I managed to bring the back seam in just enough to allow the overskirt to sit over the top without it distorting the final look of the dress. The dress feels empty, like it needs something else, so let's add some bows. When I finished making the bows and sewing them in place, I was worried it was too much, but you know what? You can never go wrong with bows, especially in Lolita. With the skirt being so puffy, I decided I needed to give this little princess a little modesty in the form of some little bloomers. I cut 2 pieces of white cotton before hemming them, adding a little lace at the bottom to tie in with the overall look. When I hemmed them, I made sure to leave enough room to place a piece of elastic through when it came time to sew up the seams. I repeated the same process for her waistband. It took me about an hour per elastic. It was determined not to go through the casing, but in the end, I won and had the victory. Using a sock pattern I've had for some time, I cut out 2 pieces of organza. I had to redo this step because I forgot to fray check the fabric before beginning to sew the seams together, which caused a frayed mess that was completely unusable. But I've learnt my lesson and will definitely be more vigilant about fray checking in future. I took some lace matching the lace on the underskirt and used it to create the top hem of the socks, before adding a cute little bow on each side. For her shoes, I used the base from Carrie Shoes and made a small template using cling film and masking tape, sketched out the shape I wanted before removing it from the doll's foot and transferring it onto paper. I cut out all the pieces using card for the soles and fabric for the main shoe base, before hemming the edge carefully as there wasn't much room for error. Next time I will definitely give myself much more seam allowance. Taking the paler sole to be the inside of the shoe, I carefully glued the bottom edge of the fabric to the card, shaping the card to the doll's foot in the process so I knew it would fit properly to her foot. Once the edges were fully glued down, I turned the heel inside out so I could sew the final seam, before gluing the outer sole down. With the soles together, I took some white embroidery thread and glued it all around the edge to give a more finished look, before finally adding a little bow to the front of each one. Originally, I was going to give her some little heeled shoes, but I fell in love with the look of the flats as I was making them. Her veil was very quick and easy. I quickly sketched out a rough shape and tested against the doll to make sure the shape and length were right. When I was happy with it, using the template, I cut it out of the same organza I used for the ruffles and her socks, free checking it before finally sewing the lace down around the circumference of the fabric. For the crown, I cut out a small circle in foam using a small nail varnish bottle to draw the right size. Taking 2 pieces of ribbon and some very fine wire, I glued the wire between the 2 pieces of ribbon to create one long piece of ribbon, which when bent would hold its shape. Cutting a small piece off the ribbon, I glued it around the outer edge of the circle, as well as gluing a pin in the centre, as this would be how it will stay on the doll's head. I then used 2 more pieces of equal length, before gluing them down in a cross shape inside the crown base. This actually took me about 6 attempts to get right. Originally, I cut the ribbon too small, and near the end, caused the ribbon and wire to separate as it was very fragile, and I wasn't being careful enough when trying to manipulate it into place. However, I got there in the end. Taking some more organza in a circle shape, I used a running stitch around the outer edge before gathering it to make a tight poof. The first one I made was much too small, so I had to remake it a little larger than the first, before placing it inside the crown. Finally, I decorated the crown with a larger half pearl in the centre of the cross section and used smaller ones around the outer band before sliding the pin through the veil to make them one piece. As always, I seal the head with a layer of MSC before breaking out my pastels and starting to lay the base foundation of blushing, lips and eyeshadow, before briefly switching to my pencils to sketch out the base shapes so I can get a rough idea of how she'll look. Having already decided I wanted to use a light blonde for her hair, I decided to give her blue eyes to complement the rest of her outfit. With the base layer done, I seal once again before continuing to build the pigments and colours, starting with the lighter ones and slowly darkening them as I went along, sealing each layer as I wanted to save my progress or the colour stopped building. Just before sealing for the final time, I quickly added a pink powder pigment to her eyeshadow, which has a gentle golden shimmer to give her a little bit of sparkle. I created yarn wefts in my usual manner. Mizekito's tutorial is perfect for this. I cut them into small pieces to make them easier to curl. I tried a few different ways to make the curls with my hair iron, but for some reason the curl refused to come off my chopstick intact. So, after rummaging around in my supplies, I found my crochet hooks and decided to use one of the smaller ones. I went through and curled each piece of yarn to create lots of ringlets. This time I didn't draw out any guidelines as the doll's original route was in the same style, so I just had to follow the holes that were already there. I started at the back of her head and began to work my way around until I got closer to the centre part. At this point, I went up one side and did one side of the part before repeating it on the other side of her head, using my hair iron at the very end to encourage the part to lay flat, though I had to be super careful because if I wasn't, I risked heating up the glue underneath and causing it to come through the top. And don't worry, I didn't forget about her face up not being completed yet. With her hair now finished, I returned to her face up and added the highlights and gloss. I decided to leave these till the very end this time, as in the past I've done these beforehand, done the hair and found I've damaged the gloss while doing the hair. So this way worked out really well for me. Now that the little princess is dressed and ready, I'd like to introduce you to Hime. I know it isn't the most imaginative name, but I got so used to calling her this that no other name seemed to fit her. As much as I cursed all the gathers as I went along, she was definitely worth each and every single one. I love her overall look, and her curls were so much fun to create and watch them all bounce, since each one is like a little spring. I wasn't too sure with the pink at first, but seeing it all together now, it complements the light blue and white perfectly. I hope you enjoyed Hime's journey. Thank you everyone for joining us. Until next time! Really, Artemis? Artemis? What do you think you're doing? What do you think you're doing, Artemis? Just making yourself comfy.